Hello everyone and welcome back to AustinPlus, where today we are not talking about Marvel for once. We're actually to all Star Wars. We're actually back onto DC again. But today we are talking about the Dark Knight trilogy, and not something that's particularly spoken about much these days, but Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy is widely regarded as one of the greatest superhero trilogies ever made. But unlike today's comic book films, it existed on its own. Batman fought crime in Gotham without Superman, or even the Justice League, and neither of them were mentioned. But what if that wasn't the case? So today we are answering the question, what if the Dark Knight trilogy was a shared universe with other DC characters such as Superman and like Wonder Woman? So without further ado, let's get into it. The Dark Knight trilogy was very good, and I think it's because it was a standalone and how well it did as a standalone. Nolan deliberately grounded Batman in realism. That's why I think it did so well. His Gotham relied on organized crime, terrorism, and psychological conflict rather than aliens, magic, or superpowers, which is so... I think it's one of those things that you can only do that for so long, to the point where people want that grounded stuff like Daredevil, especially with Marvel these days. But this grounded approach helped distinguish the trilogy from the previous comic book adaptations. However, it also meant that the wider DC universe effectively didn't exist, but I didn't think that was a problem. And I know a lot of people don't think it was a problem either. However, I do want to explore the idea as if, would it still be a thing today? If it was, would we have had the disaster of the DCEU, or would we have the DCU now? Or what if we stuck with this? I think the first heroes beyond Gotham that should have been introduced to this, if this were a shared universe, is probably I don't know. I mean, you could go down the Superman route, but you could do something different, because if Warner Bros. Had planned a shared universe, Batman Begins would have likely have contained subtle references to a much larger world. Rather than introducing fully powered heroes immediately, early films could hint at mysterious vigilantes, experimental government projects, and unexplained phenomena or corporations such as LexCorp, Queen Industries, or Ferris Aircraft. Now, these could have often operated in the background, then led to different stories if people wanted them, but the universe would grow gradually instead of rushing toward crossovers like most of them did. But obviously the anchor for DC is obviously Superman, and you need to add him in this Nolan world if this was the case, and I think the biggest challenge would be adding in a Superman. Rather than portraying him as almost like the mythical figure from the beginning, I think a Nolan-inspired Superman might focus heavily on the investigative, journalism and moral dilemmas and public distress and distrust, before gradually revealing his extraordinary abilities, so that going for that Clark Kent side rather than the Superman side. I think his arrival would fundamentally challenge Bruce Wayne's belief that heroes must rely solely on fear, technology, and human determination. Now, that brings me to another point that I haven't really added in here, but I'm going to mention it anyway. You could still have a Batman v Superman in this very universe, because I think Christian Bale's Batman, I think, could have definitely been a contender. You could have probably maybe mixed in the Henry Cavill Superman, because he's still iconic to this day, but having them two as a conflict would be much better than the one we actually got in the DCEU. In terms of a Justice League, I would like a much more grounded Justice League. Instead of immediately assembling a massive superhero team, the shared universe could actually slowly introduce characters who naturally just fit into this Nolan's tone. Because obviously Christopher Nolan's tone is so different. That's why I think this universe would be probably the most idealistic DC universe ever. Heroes like Green Arrow, The Question, Huntress, or even a younger version of Nightwing would require minimal changes. More, I think, fantastical characters could arrive later on once audiences have accepted that this world is expanding more beyond Gotham. But starting with a character like Batman is what you need to do. Don't start off with Superman. That's why I had a tiny bit of a problem with the DCU. However, I've always said that the Batman Christopher Nolan, Christian Bale could have carried on in a different way. I think they could have done a Batman Beyond type thing, and had him mentor Terry McGinnis before he fully retired. Because as we know, with The Dark Knight Rises, the ending of it would, I think, change significantly, because as much as Batman's retired, Bruce Wayne's retirement works because Gotham no longer needed a Batman. However, if the larger global threats were beginning to emerge in this universe, Bruce may feel a bit unable to walk away, but instead of permanently passing the mantle to Blake, he might actually become an experienced, like, mentor while preparing for challenges beyond Gotham City. I think that would probably restrain that retirement, because obviously you'd have more going on. And obviously the villains in this franchise would be so much bigger, so much better, and that's what we all really wanted. A connected universe would probably naturally expand on Batman's rogues beyond organized crime, but Lex Luthor could also manipulate, like, Wayne Enterprises financially, bringing in that business side, and a bit like Suits kind of vibe. And Ra's al Ghul's League of Shadows or League of Assassins might have connections to international metahuman organizations, and villains like Deathstroke, Hugo Strange, or even more grounded version of Brainiac could still emerge as the stakes gradually increase. Don't go straight for the big money, as I would say for this universe. Do it gradually if this were the case. And I think this would still maintain the Nolan maturity storytelling style that we all really love. Now, there is a lot of benefits and risks to a shared universe with this version of Batman. There's no doubt about that, because a connected Dark Knight universe would offer exciting crossover opportunities and long-term storytelling. But however, it also risks weakening what made the trilogy special in the first place, because Nolan's films succeeded because every conflict felt personal, grounded, and believable. But expanding too quickly into this world-ending threat could undermine the character's drama, which I think is what went wrong with the DCEU's Ben Affleck Batman. I think if you're comparing this shared universe or idea to the DCU we got and the DCU that we actually have now, I think it would be very different, but I think it's the one that we all want. If successful, the franchise might actually have evolved into a slower, more grounded alternative to the MCU. The DC universe would look a lot like the grounded version of the MCU. Instead of releasing multiple interconnected films every single year, DC could focus on carefully planned standalone stories or shows that occasionally crossed over, that it sets up a new story. The heroes would exist within the same universe and same world without every film becoming a setup for the next event. But I think shared universe would probably prioritize character over spectacle. So what if the Dark Knight trilogy was a shared universe? I think a Nolan-led DC universe could have been one of cinema's most unique superhero franchises, if not the best. It would likely be smaller, slower, and more realistic than the MCU, emphasizing grounded storytelling before introducing increasingly extraordinary elements. Whether it would surpass the trilogy itself, however, it is far less certain. And I think it's safe to say we're not getting this ever, but it is still nice to think about. It could have changed superhero cinema forever. Nolan's grounded vision may have provided DC with a completely different blueprint, one that was built on patience, realism, and character-driven storytelling, but perhaps the trilogy's greatest strength was that it knew when to end. But sometimes the best cinematic universe is the one that never tries to become one. I do strongly believe that. But without further ado, folks, that is the end of today's video. I do hope you all enjoyed it, and if you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and comment what you would like to see on the channel. But I hope you have an amazing day as always, and I'll see you all in the next one. See you, lads. Yeah.